Oh, there it is. There it is. Okay. If it goes off, it goes off. All right. Well, we're going to continue our look at the book of Hosea.
Nope. You have to leave the girls.
Because the book of Hosea, as we've been talking about, is actually really important in terms of the life of the church and in terms of the life of what we need to know about in our relationship with God. And it's also very important when it comes to things like ministry and being called, because, you know, we all know everybody thinks that they are called to ministry. Everybody thinks that they are called to be great. Everybody thinks that they're called to all this stuff. But the reality is that being called to this stuff is very, very, very difficult. It's not easy to be called to ministry. It's not easy to be called of God. And a lot of what God asks us to do is not a whole lot of fun. And so we build up these different walls. We build up all this stuff. You know, it's like I had said, we see all the women and the men on the internet who think they're called and they're anointed and they're purposed and they're not sleeping around and they're not doing this and that, and so God should send them this perfect man. And they talk about it and they go over it and they say it on Facebook how, God, you know, my eggs are getting older, or nonsense like that, or God, I just know you've got this perfect man, and they think he's just going to be everything that they want. Well, Hosea proves that we don't always get what we want when it comes to our relationships. And that sometimes the relationships that God asks leaders to be in are very difficult. And I can really attest to that from the experiences I've seen with people. People who are married and in ministry tend to have very, very difficult relationships because they're not just trying to maintain a ministry, they're also trying to maintain a life. And they're trying to deal with being ordinary and extraordinary at the same time, walking that fine line. And the truth is that it doesn't always work out really good. It's always not really easy. It's not always really fun. And so sometimes God puts people in relationships that are hard on purpose. Whether it's to teach them something specifically or it's to teach the church something through them, through their own experience, to give them the ability to teach on it. God asks leaders to do hard things. It's not we're just leaders and we're going to lay up here in the best seats in the church, in our little thrones that we make to ourselves. I mean, I've seen them where people put king and queen on them and put all kinds of ridiculous stuff everywhere, where they're just going to kick back in their big outfit and their big ugly hat and their big ugly robes and wear their big ugly shoes that are $200 or $300 and aren't worth that much money, or their designer suit and the first lady with the hat that takes up half the room that looks like a flying saucer landed on her head. You know, we have all these different concepts in church. They think that that's what it means to be in ministry and to be married, and the truth is that it isn't any of that at all. And so Hosea was this prophet who did his thing, who was living his life. God told him to go marry a prostitute and have children by her, because the question was going to be there, are they going to be his children or not biologically? And so that all these different children, all this relationship, this whole thing was to teach them and to teach Israel about where God was at with them. God was tired of the people pursuing these idolatrous relationships. They were tired. He was tired of the people always going after these false gods. And in this marriage relationship, God taught us something powerful through Hosea. And what he taught us and what he was trying to teach them is that you cannot keep rejecting God and expect God to respond a certain way to you. Now, we know that God is loving. We know that God is always going to be there for us. But if we want to walk in the favor of God, we need to be in God and do God's will. And unfortunately, there are an awful lot of people who want to be, quote unquote, married to God, we could say, but they want to cheat on him. They want to be with God on Saturday and Sunday, maybe Saturday night, starting somewhere around there. But then on Monday morning, they want to go pursue the world. They want to go run around and do all this stuff and have all this money and have this lifestyle and pursue something that is not of God. And so the story continues in chapter 2, which is what we're going to look at today. One of the things that Hosea proves in his very life is that the law was never meant to be kept. And I think that that's important because there are a lot of groups today trying to get us to observe the law again or to reinstitute it. But Hosea proves what it says in, I believe it's in Galatians or in Ephesians, where he says that The law existed to make us aware that we needed to know we needed a Savior. We needed somebody else to do it for us, not us to try and keep it ourselves. It was actually a setup so that we would fail and that we would realize that we were failing. Because basically in his marriage, he broke every law that existed. He broke every law conceivable. You know, they had all those laws about virginity and about proving the bride. There were all these laws about purity. There were laws about the priests. And so, you know, the holy ones and the prophets and all that would have had to follow certain regulations. But when it comes to this kind of thing, Hosea literally being told by God to defy all that proves that it was never meant to be kept.
Amen.
So let's start in verse 1. Say of your brothers, my people, and of your sisters, my loved one. Rebuke your mother, rebuke her, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. Let her remove the adulterous look from her face and the unfaithfulness from between her breasts. Otherwise I will strip her naked and make her as bare as on the day she was born. I will make her like a desert, turn her into a parched land, and slay her with thirst. I will not show my love to her children because they are the children of adultery. Their mother has been unfaithful and has conceived them in disgrace. She has said, I will go after my lovers who give me my food and my water, my wool and my linen, my oil and my drink. Therefore I will block her path with thorn bushes. I will wall her in so that she cannot find her way. So we're starting to see a rebuke here, which is really important because a lot of people don't think that God does that anymore, or that God doesn't rebuke. Now, even though this sounds harsh, this is really said in almost kind of a poetic manner, in kind of a way of love, that there is something where he's calling to something. He's trying to stir something. And so it's saying to rebuke the mother, rebuke her, for she's not his wife and I'm not her husband. If we're not truly walking with God like we should be, and there's a reason why God's relationship with his people is always spoken of as a marriage, which I'll talk about in a minute. If we're not walking with God like we should be, then we aren't rightly belonging or married to God.
Right.
We aren't really doing what we're supposed to be doing with him. And so it's not that God changes, it's that we change toward God and we act like we don't want God anymore. We don't want to deal with God. And so God is not going to force us to stay with him if we don't want to. It's just like people talk about with marriage. If you really don't want to stay with somebody, don't. Okay? I'm saying that, I'm going to get letters about that, but you know, if you really don't want to stay with somebody, you really don't feel that that relationship is there, then leave. Because it even says it here, if you don't want to be together, if it's not working, then you're not really even married. And so the reason that God always spoke of his relationship as a marriage with his people is because the ancients understood their relationship with their deities differently than we did. That term Baal, or we talk about, I've heard it said Baal, but I think that the correct pronunciation is Baal. Baal actually meant husband. I have a message called Are You Married to Baal? Because it literally meant that they were married to that God. And so the ancients did not just see themselves as being close to God, they saw themselves as literally being united or being one with him in a way that we really don't understand now. It actually probably sounds kind of odd to us hearing that kind of a thing today. But that was literally how they understood it, that they were bound for life, that they were bound in this thing, and that they belonged to God and God belonged to them, and that they had this type of a relationship. And so for God to be talking like this isn't that odd to people of that day and age. And what he's talking about here in this rebuke is that if you aren't going to be together, then that's fine, but the reality is that there are complications for turning our back on God. And one of them is that they will become in a place like a desert, turn into a parched land, desolate. We will talk about the desert in a little bit because the desert comes up a couple of times in this chapter. But basically, if you don't want to be with God, then God does not have to show love to them. He doesn't have to show his favor to you. He doesn't have to show his grace to you. You don't have to receive it. You can go on your way and go after what you think is more desirable. But I think that what they talk about here is important because they're talking about, I'm going to go after the people, is what they're talking about here, who meet the immediate need, or who meet the need for, I'm going to use a word that's going to get me in trouble, prosperity.
Mm-hmm.
that people want to chase after or go after all these different things in life, whether it's their food, their water, their wool, their linen, their oil, and their drink. And so whatever they find is most prosperous is what they want to pursue. So if they think they're getting this stuff today, let's take the prostitution angle out of it. Let's say that's where you're getting your money from on your job. And it means you can't ever come to church. Because we know people like that. You know, we hear about it all the time. They're always missing church. Oh, I can't come, I got to work. Oh, I can't ever be here, I got to work. Oh, I can't do this, I got to work. Every time you invite them to something, oh, I got to work. Oh, I got to do this, oh, I got to do that. Well, then that means that they're being unfaithful against God with their job. Okay? Or let's say that you are in a relationship. Let's say you are married or you're dating or you're really going after somebody and they're your sustenance. They're giving you your food and your water and your wool and your linen, or you think that they're your catch to some sort of a status symbol, which a lot of people want to get married for that reason. They don't want to get married because they love anybody. They want the status. They want to look good. So they're going after their food and their water and their status and their prestige in a husband or a wife. That means that that husband or that wife is their idol. Or you want your children. I know people, God give me children or I'll die. We talked about it in Bible study over in Genesis in that whole mess. God give me children or I'll die. Or however you want to put it, oh, I need to have a baby, and you're spending all your money on in vitro and fertility treatments and thing after thing after thing after thing after thing. There are tons of kids in this world to adopt who need a home. If it's more than God, if it's taking the place of God in your life, if it's your only pursuit, if it's your only thing, then it's an idol. And God doesn't bless that. And so God will step back from a situation where idols have crept in. And I'm going to say there's nothing wrong with having a job. There's nothing wrong with getting married. There's nothing wrong with wanting to get married. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have a baby. There isn't anything wrong with any of that stuff. But when that stuff starts to take the place of God, when that stuff starts to take the place that God is supposed to have in your life, then it's a problem. Verse 6, therefore I will block her path with thorn bushes. I will wall her in so that she cannot find her way. And so what would be the significance of this? Well, obstacles make us realize how much we need God and how much we need to turn back to Him. And so sometimes, a lot of times, these different obstacles come our way so that we will realize that we need to not do it alone. It's like the principle of the law as a stumbling block. That the law has to take a certain role in order to make us realize that we cannot do it ourselves. Verse 7, she will chase after her lovers but not catch them. She will look for them but not find them. Then she will say, I will go back to my husband as at first, for then I was better off than now. She has not acknowledged that I was the one who gave her the grain, the new wine and oil, who lavished on her the silver and gold which they used for Baal. And so there that is again, once again, talking about that they lavished and they took things that they were given, or they took things that they received and they gave it and they invested it in a false god. I'm going to say right now, stop giving your kids everything. Everybody wants to give their kids everything. All that does is make spoiled kids. All that does is make a mess. Stop giving them everything. Stop thinking that you need to give your spouse everything. Stop thinking that you need to give